So, for this episode, I'm interviewing the director, Dane Christensen, and producer, Jenn Smith, of a new documentary short film called Faithful. It's about two gay Mormon women named Lorelei and Mary Lou who live together in small-town Roosevelt, Utah, but who sleep in separate rooms and live a celibate lifestyle in order to remain in good standing with the LDS Church. So, without further ado, let's look for rainbows together, y'all.
So won't you love me right? Love me right through your heart, my darling. Yeah, won't you love me right? Love me right through your heart, my darling.
So, anyway, I am today. I have the distinct pleasure of being with Jenn Smith, the producer and Dane Christensen, the director of a short documentary film called Faithful about two gay Mormon women who live in Roosevelt, Utah. That's recently come out. I saw it at the the Worldwide Affirmation Conference just about a week ago, I guess now. I thought it was breathtaking. And they invited me to come speak with them, and this is our interview. So I wanted to first ask, before we get into sort of the background of it or anything about it, where can people see this film? Because I don't want to sell it if they don't know where they can go to look at it. And if there's no place now, I mean,
So it's a multifaceted answer. Currently, we're submitting it to film festivals because we've from the inception of it, we've always believed this film does nothing if people don't see it.
Sure.
But we are going kind of through the film festival circuit. We've been to, what's the name? You want to say which ones they were?
Yeah, so we, of course, premiered at the UN Women Global Voices Film Festival in San Francisco. That was our global premiere. Mm-hmm. And we've been accepted to Denver Film Festival. It's coming up in November.
Oh, that's exciting.
And then we have we have a whole long list of other ones that we're just waiting on, so time will tell.
Okay.
But after the film festival run, we're seeking out some what we call distribution, which could be anything from, it's publicly available online, it gets picked up by The Atlantic or somewhere else, but
sure,
it will have a home on the internet
eventually,
probably within the next year.
So probably the thing to do now is, if there's a film festival, sort of watch this space for film festivals near you that have it, and then eventually it'll all be available online and you'll be able to check it out there.
That's right.
I would also say if people are just like really antsy and want to see it, they can contact us directly.
Okay.
And we'll send them a private link.
Or if they want to host a community screening.
Sure.
Better answer.
Even better answer. Absolutely. Okay, fair enough. So I will have the contact information for that on the sort of on my website version of the podcast as well. So you'll be able to make that contact if you want to. So the next question that I had was just sort of how did this film come together? How did the two of you meet? How did you decide sort of this subject matter? How did you decide on these two women as the subject? I don't know. This is a really broad question, but.
How about you start, Dane?
I was just going to say, I'll start and I'll let you finish it. So I moved out here to California to do I got into the Stanford documentary film MFA program. And I was it's a 2-year program, and in the second year you spend the whole year working on your thesis film. So I was in my first year of the program when the policy came out, the policy change.
November 2015.
November 2015. And so that just kind of there were a lot of things related to that policy, of course, but that really just put it on my radar, and it just instantly hit me like, maybe that could be a really good thesis film idea, something that's timely, a story that definitely needs to be told. And so I spent the next 8 months, year to researching, just talking with as many gay Mormons as possible.
And you grew up LDS, right?
I grew up LDS. A straight white male from Mormon suburbia, so it's very clear cut and cookie cutter right there.
Sure.
And we'll get a little more into that later. That kind of is part of this. But I spent the next 8 months to a year just talking with every gay Mormon I could get my hands on. And because I was new to it, and
Sure.
that's I went to North Star Conference just to network, just to headhunt, really.
Sure.
That's where I met Mary Lou and Lorelei, our
Interesting.
2 subjects in the film, but it wasn't like, oh yeah, you're the ones, you're it. It was kind of like, oh, okay, I'll remember you.
Sure.
Let me get your number.
And if I could just briefly note, North Star is an organization that now, my understanding is that they used to do some reparative therapy stuff. Now they are a sort of a support group that is both church affirming and like queer affirming is their stance. Right.
And when they were doing reparative therapy, they were called Evergreen.
Oh, right. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, so fast forwarding a little bit, there was a fireside. I don't know. Do I want to explain that or do you want to explain that? I'll explain that. So, I moved out here. I have this film idea that I'm becoming more and more passionate about. And I was like, I want to tell a story about gay Mormons. I feel like that's a needed, and then Googling on the internet, and I was like, oh, there just so happens to be a monthly fireside about LGBT Mormon topics here in the Bay Area. And I was
Wow.
like, how, fortuitous,
Right.
coincidental,
That it would be right here where I am.
just down the street from where I was living. So I started going to that, and that was my first foray into meeting gay Mormons, talking about what they're going through, and the whole topic at large. And Jenn was going to that as well, and that's actually where we first met.
That's where we first met.
Yeah,
Yes, and at the time I was working on putting together an anthology of queer Mormon women's stories,
Oh, wow.
which has never been done.
Yeah.
And I come from a background of queer theory and feminist theories.
Mm-hmm.
I was in academia for a while, and my research question which was really about sex ratio at birth in China and why there are so few women relative to men.
Sure.
I mean, it was Valerie Hudson's book, Bare Branches, that got me started on this whole journey. That led me accidentally into feminist theories, but it was taught by people who were at UCLA very familiar with queer theories. So I come from that body of knowledge that I was going to bring into an anthology on queer Mormon women. And I say all this because women's studies, was really important to me. And I was viewing my work through those lenses. So anytime I talk to someone, for example, like Dane, who tells me he's going to do a film, I wonder, where are the women in this film? So that's what happened.
Right. So if I remember correctly, Jenn. I was about to make up something really funny, but no. Sorry.
I want to hear it now. Now you have to share it.
If I remember correctly, Jenn, you just came at me and let's make a film. We need to do this right now. And I was like, whoa, calm your horses.
Before
let's
you
think
even
about
knew
this.
me, right?
No, I just remember we met each other, we would talk, and we just kind of kept seeing each other every month, and and I knew you were doing a book project. You knew I was doing a film.
Well, the first time we talked.
Okay.
First time we talked, you said, I'm doing this film on gay Mormons. I said, are there any women?
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And you said, and you did a 360 turn. I remember that. You just spun around and you're just I pride myself on being such a feminist. How did I forget? Because you were talking about this person and this person, and they were all male.
Right.
That you wanted to interview.
And that's because, as I was doing this deep dive into everything that was gay and Mormon on it, it's just so the gay male Mormon experience is so accessible, and that's what I was being fed.
Mm-hmm.
That's
true, because all of your research, when you Google, gay Mormons, you get, and I've done the research, about 23 films that are focused on documentary or feature or non-documentary, on the male gender.
So if I could just, I know that we have another question that we're still answering, but I wanted to know if I could get your thoughts on sort of why, do you think there's a specific Mormon sort of reason for that? I mean, in the LGBT community, there seems to be a lot more sort of media about, particularly cisgender gay males than there are about, other identities. And I think it seems to me at least, like there's more stories about males than there are women. Do you think that's just, this is the way that queer stories are told generally, or do you think there may be a specific Mormon reason to this, why queer Mormon women are so less visible?
Okay, I love data. So in a recent Gallup poll, 2016 of Americans. It showed that let's see, in 2012, the same Gallup poll showed that there was 3.4% of people who identified as LGBTQIA+, this was just LGBT, were 3.4% female and 3.5% male. Now in 2016, the figure for females was over 5%, and the male stayed pretty much the same. About 3.6, 3.7%.
Sure.
It was a very binary poll,
Right.
so it didn't account for non-binary genders.
Right.
But this shows that in those 4 years between 2012 or 2016, maybe it doesn't show, but it suggests that women have become more comfortable just only in the last 4 years.
Sure.
There's all sorts of research that probably have been done on this or are currently being done on the reasons behind why women feel more safe. Women in general in America.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have been talking to a lot of women about their reasons for not coming out sooner.
Mm-hmm.
Late in life lesbian is a phenomenon throughout the world.
Yeah.
But for the LDS population, for the LDS population, women have to contend with patriarchy at large.
Right.
This is a Judeo-Christian religion, so it's very male-dominated. Spatially, I mean, you just look at kind of where men stand and where women sit, in a congregation. That gives you an idea. It's very gendered. So general patriarchy is a reason, and there's also this phenomenon that's very interesting. I don't think it's talked about a lot, but this idea of perceived scarcity. Maybe there aren't women. Maybe I'm the freak, and there aren't other women like me, because of an interesting circularity, right? So
Right.
You have these big forces that, first of all, let me backtrack. Okay, so many reasons, right? So let me backtrack to the other factor, which is the gender sexuality. So female sexuality actually doesn't really exist in Mormonism. In fact, we're all technically asexuals until a temple marriage.
Sure.
But even so, growing up, if you grew up in the church, as a woman, you are the gatekeeper of male sexuality.
Yep.
What you wear, where you are, those are the types of questions that a woman might be asked by a bishop if she was sexually assaulted. Where were you?
Right.
Why were you at his house alone?
Right.
Why were you wearing that dress?
Right.
So it's almost all of the
But
responsibility falls.
for even sexual sin for a male, you're not likely going to be asked those questions.
That's
or
correct.
or like maybe less in a less pressing sort of like blaming kind of way potentially.
Right. So it's very imbalanced. Female sexuality exists as only a gatekeeper for the male. So everything is through the male lens. Everything that we do that's related to sexuality. So if you want to talk about how your sexuality is oriented towards the female, I mean, there's not even a place for you to speak from, because your sexuality technically doesn't even exist.
And certainly not until marriage. And if you're a lesbian, that's not happening in a church context. So I could see where that becomes a sort of where does it even come up? I suppose in some folks' minds.
Yeah, there's just no dialogue around female sexuality.
Fair enough.
The fact that we don't own our own sexuality in this religion, or in most religions.
Sure.
Okay, so if there's no place to talk about it, then you're going to be invisible in general. So you're not gonna see a lot of women who are gonna come out and say, "Hey, I'm a lesbian and a Mormon."
Right.
They're not gonna not talk about it. And then the ones who don't talk about it, they kind of a lot of times just quietly leave.
Right.
And the ones who stay quiet.
Yep.
They stay silent about it. And so you have these other people looking around going, well, there must not be.
Right.
There's this assumption that they don't exist
Right.
because no one's speaking up.
And it's really interesting because a lot of the way that's talked about, I think this probably happens to women a bit more than men who come out who are LDS or grew up that way, is I feel like you hear a lot. One thing that happened a lot with the whole Savannah thing that happened is, well, how does she know? Like the sort of doubting of that narrative, because it's like, well, it's too early because, again, since you haven't yet reached an age of marriage, well, how could you know? Because that's the time at which sort of like the sexual switches on, I suppose, in the sort of thought of a lot of people. Maybe
That's
it's not,
true.
really verbalized, but anyway.
Oh, there's a real erasure of sexual awareness, and anything that has anything to do with reality. The reality of our sexual development is completely erased, in the Mormon narrative, for the sake of, I don't know, chastity and being virtuous, of good report and praiseworthy. These
Sure.
things we seek after.
Right.
And but it, which is good. But the flip side is you have people who feel very alone and become, oh gosh, very isolated. I mean, loneliness is one of the worst feelings. One of the worst feelings that we can have as humans, and this is when it comes to sexuality and orientation. That is a very pain-inducing kind of a phenomenon to be sexually oriented, non-hetero,
Right.
and to not be able to talk about it.
Well, and that's one thing that I have to say, that one of the biggest things that I sort of noticed in watching the film, that I saw while I was at Affirmation, was these are two women. I mean, we're possibly getting ahead of ourselves, but these are two women who live together, have a relationship, and yet there was a real feeling of loneliness in the film. So I think that really sort of underlines what you were just saying.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
absolutely.
if there was anything else that we didn't get to as far as like sort of the background of it that we interrupted by asking that other question.
Well, yeah, that's a big question in of itself. Like, why aren't there more stories about queer Mormon women? Why aren't there more stories about Mormon women in general?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, so when Jenn, she just kind of, was telling me these things, and it just like made sense. Like, and when it got to the point in my school schedule where I had to make a decision, I have to do a thesis film, I have to choose
Right.
my subjects, I have to, get the ball rolling. I got assignments to turn in.
Yeah.
It was, I don't know, it just kind of, it made sense. Like, Jenn wanted to be on board. We have this lesbian couple that are willing to do it, and I feel like it just all clicked, and it felt like the right choice.
right, I saw that there was a huge lack. I mean, in the U.S., about 55% of the women who were polled who consider themselves LGBT those who consider themselves LGBT in the U.S. were women, 55% women, 45% men in 2016. So I saw this shift, in people who are becoming more willing to speak up, who are female, and the rate of that sort of being able to feel safe to come out was not happening in our Mormon religion. Now, so the one piece of data I have is from Affirmation.
Right.
The membership total of Affirmation.
And just real quick, I just might mention for listeners who either are not LDS or not familiar with sort of Affirmation, it's an organization of queer Mormons.
And their allies.
And their allies, and they have lots of conferences. Check out their website. But anyway, just so everybody knows sort of where we're at. That it's an organization of and for queer Mormons.
Right, and they're different from North Star and that they affirm people wherever they are on their journey, especially in regards to Mormonism.
Yeah.
So at their conferences, they will always be safe spaces for people who no longer identify as Mormons.
Yeah.
And for whom Mormonism causes a great deal of pain.
Yeah, I saw there was a lot of post-Mormon kind of stuff, and there was, I mean, everywhere from people who were like, let me figure out how this works, I can't leave my Mormon identity behind, to people who were like, I want to leave it behind as much as possible. Everywhere in between there was something. Anyway, that's what I saw at least.
Yes, it's a great organization, and their membership has increased quite a bit. And 5 years ago, now I can't recall the numbers. Sorry, but currently, of all the paying members in Affirmation, 30% identify as queer women. So that's very different from 55%.
Right. And that's probably actually gone up in recent years. I mean, I think
yes,
I think 30%
absolutely.
is probably the high watermark. It's not like they've gone down.
It's not quite half like in America, but it is more than it has been in
Right.
the past. So so a third
Okay.
are feeling, and so that's why we felt like there was room to grow.
Right.
That there was room to still have a discourse about lesbian Mormons. Now, so Dane and I met on and off for a few months, and then we kind of decided, oh, maybe I should consult on this film and help maybe do interviews.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Since I do understand kind of at least the research and the scholarly aspects of.
I feel like I told you, or at least in my
studies.
head, I said you were like my queer expert. Because I was still kind of new to all this, still am, and you just knew so much, and I was like, you need to be part of this.
Yeah, so much, from the ivory tower.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that would have been, and I've done some field research as well, but this was exciting to me to be on the ground. Okay, so then we talked to a few people, we corresponded with them, and then we decided on Mary and Lorelei. I think it was Dane who said, hey, guess where they live? Roosevelt. And then I looked it up. I was like, Roosevelt looks like where I grew up in rural Utah. It looks like Price, Utah, where I had spent some years.
And just real quick, Roosevelt is probably like, what, 2 hours sort of west?
It's
east
2.5
of
hours.
like Salt Lake Provo?
Yeah, 2.5 hours east of Salt Lake. It's just it's a half hour away from Vernal.
Mm-hmm.
And to kind of for our listeners to get an idea of like what this place is like, Vernal seems like New York City compared to Roosevelt.
Wow.
Like they have Cafe Rio, they have a Costco, they have a dinosaur museum,
Uh-huh.
a temple.
Right.
Roosevelt is 2 streets that intersect,
Interesting.
basically, and a Taco Bell that closes at 6 p.m.
But Taco Bells are like that's known for like closing at 3 in the morning. Wow.
I'm
okay.
exaggerating a little bit
Yeah.
about the Taco Bell, but
Sure. Yeah.
after
no.
6 p.m. the dining choices are very dismal.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, it's small town America.
Yeah.
6,000 people. Very dependent on oil economy.
Oh, okay. Like fracking and like that sort of thing.
I don't know if
I don't know if
they
they,
do
I don't
fracking.
think they do fracking.
Lots
Anyway.
of drills. There's lots of drills.
Yeah,
Fair
oil
enough.
derricks
See
all
that-
over the place.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Never been
See
out there.
that in the film. Check it out.
Yeah.
Since we made this film, a lot of people have come up to us and said, I'm from Roosevelt, or I have an aunt who lives in Roosevelt.
Huh.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, I guess it's not as rural as we thought. But at any rate, the landscapes were amazing and beautiful. And we thought it was a very interesting metaphor for kind of the story that we were starting to get, from talking to Mary Lou and Lorelei.
Yeah, sort of very bleak, but also very beautiful and very
Yeah.
expansive.
Exactly.
From the get-go, we were inspired by the landscape.
Mm.
That
And the
we knew that was going to be
possibilities.
part of the story.
Because of the vastness, right? I mean, it kind of lends itself to this supposition of like a very possible future,
Yeah.
right? So for all those reasons, it just combined, and the fact that Lorelei and Mary Lou are just wonderful on camera, they're naturals.
Yeah.
We decided to go with them.
So was there any sort of trepidation on their part, like, ooh, if we publicize this, it's
Yeah.
going to cause us problems in our? Because
yes.
they're again, just real quick for those who don't know, these are active, believing, temple recommend holding Mormon women,
Correct.
who go to church every Sunday in a place that may not be super receptive, like either in the town or in their like church unit to sort of gay issues being really even talked about. Were there any sort of concern of, ooh, this is really like we're out kind of, but this will make us really out, or like what are the repercussions going to be with either family or church or community? Like, I don't know. I'm just interested to hear a little about that.
There were all of the above,
Right.
for sure. So Jenn and I, we got on a call with them when Jenn and I had decided we want to proposition them to be in our film.
Mm.
And there was all of that where it's like they were hesitant, trepidatious. They live in an ultra-conservative community. This is the last place on earth that will be gay-friendly.
Sure.
Again, exaggeration, but you get the idea.
Right.
But what I thought was really cool with what they said is we want our story to be told because we want to
Wow.
change people's minds. And this isn't anything necessarily unique to me or whatever, but I've really gravitated towards, like, my mantra for filmmaking is changing the world by the stories we tell.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Jenn and I would be on the same page with that. It's like we wanted to tell a story of a queer women, queer Mormon women, and this is our way of making the world a better place. Mary Lou and Lorelei, so they were on board for that reason,
Right.
despite all these kind of hesitations, things holding them back. And they're super funny in the whole process. They're not.
Well, they're really funny in the film.
They're funny in the film. They can get serious and really emotional, but they're just like, everything's on the table.
Sure.
But they were like, Dane, we're ultra boring. Like, you're gonna get 2 minutes of footage out of us.
Right.
Sitting around.
Right.
Like, we do nothing. And I just roll my eyes at them every time because, from a filmmaking standpoint, it's like you're a female Mormon couple who have temple recommends, and you live in a celibate relationship in Roosevelt, Utah. Like, this just has all the check marks for just being just interesting from the get-go.
Sure. Well, and one other thing I think is really interesting is that one other reason that maybe we don't see a lot of these stories is that there seems to be a binary sort of almost expectation with queer Mormons that if you're queer, you're no longer going to be Mormon. Like the choice of that you have to leave is sort of almost made for you. And I sort of I wonder sort of how you thought about that or how they thought about that. How for a lot of Mormons, like being the Mormon part of that identity is almost as important, if not, is probably similarly important to like their gay identity. And I don't know. I just interested in your thoughts or sort of their thoughts that they talked to you about during the filming.
If I'll chime in, that's what drew me to them originally is. In hindsight, everything is 2020, right? So like, it just makes sense. Like, of course we would have gone with them, but like during this whole process, I was just in a whirlwind of like navigating my own personal views, my own personal beliefs, like how to deal with all this. Because that's why I did the film as well, as a kind of a personal journey to reconcile. Mm-hmm. How do I be Mormon and be this ally? Like, how can I be part of an institution that doesn't accept my LGBT brothers and sisters?
Right.
Where was I going with that? So, where was I going? What was your question again?
Just sort of about like how there's that choice that you must either be queer or Mormon, but you can't be both.
So with Mary Lou and Lorelai, it's just they live every Sunday, every week. They live that intersection between their belief and their identities, like, and they're trying to make both work. And that was very unique in at least the people I had been talking to. Most people are kind of either left the church or just kind of inactive or just completely celibate and just kind of repressing who they are, that choice. So they just seem like, no, we're going to do both head on. And I thought that was really interesting.
Sure. Fair enough.
Yeah, so it felt like their situation in a way was maximizing of this conflict between religion and relationship.
Sure.
Romantic relationship.
Fair enough.
And for a film, a film is all about like what's the tension in the film, what's the conflict, and like this just like laid it out on a silver platter.
No, I feel like you guys got
perfect.
to. I mean, it was just for as short as it was, and for like, I mean, it's not a real kinetic film, there's not a lot of like extreme motions going on, but like you get really quick into that sort of tension, and you sit there.
Yeah.
For the entire 17 minutes.
Yeah.
You don't have to really build up to it. It's pretty. At least for me, it was pretty dialed up the whole time. So, I was also curious. One other question I had was sort of what both of you learned in the sort of filming, and if there was anything that I would love to talk to Lorelai and Mary Lou about this, but since they're not here, just sort of anything they reported to you about. I feel like sometimes when you are able to sort of produce something or be a part of producing something, you learn things about yourself if you're the subject. And I was curious if they talked about, if there was anything that they learned about themselves or about any of these issues as they were doing it too.
Yeah, things have changed for them.
Oh.
Since we first met them, they were living in the basement, which was captured in the film, of Mary Lou's parents' home in Roosevelt.
Sure.
And since
which is also symbolic in its own way,
right.
From a filmmaking standpoint.
Absolutely.
Right.
You actually see that in the let me interject real quick. Should you see the film, you actually see a scene with Lorelai in the basement of a house, and the film doesn't talk about the complete living situation, so you just assume that's their house.
Right.
But it was a strategic decision to put her in the basement, looking through that window, over that voiceover, because. It just kind of felt like, the world on top of them, just like forcing them down, suppressing them. Anyways, sorry, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, that's right. I was also going to talk about kind of social hierarchy as well, right? Being in the basement, them being non-hetero, and then the people who are hetero living above them. So things have changed for them. They no longer live in the basement. They moved out, got their own place. They're much happier for it.
Sure.
They've told us, and they've they have plans. They have big plans.
They both got jobs now, which is good.
They're hoping to leave the small town and move to a larger city.
Oh, wow.
This was in many ways eye-opening for all of us in terms of what we're faced with. You know, what they're faced with and what we see is that they have. So what they're faced with and what they see. Do you need to get that?
No, absolutely not. Sorry.
Let me start over. What Mary Lou and Lorelai are faced with are kind of the scraps from the kitchen table instead of the full feast.
Yeah.
If you're a hetero person in the Mormon faith, you have a temple marriage, you have potential to go to the highest kingdom, the celestial kingdom. You have a man who can take you there.
Yeah, it's incredibly fulsome. In some ways, I mean, we build it out more than Mormons build that relationship out more than many other traditions. You know, it almost feels like if you're Mormon, like your sort of relationship takes on more of a place in your life and is a bigger part of like your future than it is for other folks, perhaps.
That's right, because it is existential. We know where we came from. We know what we're doing here. We know where we're going. You know, post-death, and not every religion has, you know, the fullness of the answer for what happens after you die.
Right.
And there's different tier levels that you can go to. Now, the highest level requires that you're, a man and a wife married together, as stated in the proclamation on the family. And you have the fullness. You have the full feast. You have a mansion.
Right.
You have endless progeny.
Right.
You could potentially be gods yourself.
Right.
Yourselves to.
Yeah, that eternal progression, as we talk
Correct.
about, is really only for this group of people.
Right. But it's so contingent on the relationship between two humans.
Right.
And they have to be a male and a female. So here's Mary Lou and Lorelai, and they don't love that way.
Right.
And they love each other, and they want that fullness, but they can't have it. And so they're going to get the whatever they can. They're going to do the best they can. They want to continue to go to the temple, so they stay celibate, so that they can hold on to that recommend, which is kind of a pass into a temple.
Yeah.
Mormons can have. They want to, but they also want to be together.
Right.
Because they're so happy with each other.
Sure. Well, and one other thing that I maybe the most memorable line from the entire film for me was that, I mean, it seems to me like if they remain sort of faithful and observant Mormons, which it seems like they are going to, at least right now, that's their plan, is that they don't have many dreams as far as like what they expect to happen for themselves in this life, but even in the life to come. The line was like, oh, well, maybe we can get married to these people who were gay in this life, who will then, as many as you could say Mormon doctrine, or at least sort of our belief is that these gay men are going to become heterosexual in the afterlife. They can marry them and then be sister wives, so that they're sort of, the way that they experience love, they don't think it'll go away, but that it'll still be sort of second class even in the hereafter, which I felt like was incredibly sad, in that they don't even have a dream of a fulfilling relationship with each other in the hereafter, where, you know, many people think, oh, well, all our dreams are going to come true and we're going to be playing harps and all that sort of thing, which I thought was just really one of the incredible deep sadness, themes of deep sadness that I saw in the film. Anyway.
That moment is particularly powerful, and I call it their grand accommodation. This hope that they express. They also say that they say, we know it's crazy, but you know, we hope that we could get married to a gay man and be sister wives in the hereafter, which I call that a grand accommodation, because they're trying so hard to hit all the check marks of like an active, good Mormon, and in order to do that, they just have to bend and contort who they are actually in order to make that work. And I call it this grand accommodation to, like, in order to be, you know, faithful in our church and who we are, this is what we have to do. And I think it's just super indicative of the whole situation. And we put that line in there so that, you know, it really not hurts people, it really touches people. It's like, whoa, like, that's their hope.
Right.
Like, that's their best case scenario.
Right.
And it just gets people thinking. And because, like, what we want with the film is to create conversation and foster compassion. And I think that line really supports that, is people start thinking, like, oh, okay, like, let's think about this. Like, what can we change? What can't change?
Sure.
How can we be better allies, and so on?
Well, now that you've mentioned reaction to it, I want to shift a little bit to talking about sort of the reaction after the film was produced. My first question is actually what I think. I don't know. My own feeling is that perhaps the most important reaction to the film is how Mary Lou and Lorelai viewed it after they were able to see the finished product. Like, tell me about what their reaction was like.
Well, Lorelai said right away, she said, I don't think that I'm that interesting. Again.
Even after she saw the film.
Even after she saw the film.
That is, I can't even conceive of that, how that would not be. Anyway, I mean, maybe if it's your life, you can't see it outside of yourself, but.
I had this running joke with Mary Lou Lorelai. I was like, you guys have to perform for me, because if you don't, I don't graduate. So
Well, if you've seen the film, that wasn't an issue. I
right,
mean,
that clearly wasn't an issue, but, like, this is our relationship with them. We're really close.
Yeah.
From the get-go, we just developed a really nice, deep relationship with them, so we could be with camera and Mike and everyone, like Mike. We developed a really deep relationship from the get-go, so we were able to go in with the camera, with the microphone, and with our whole team, and, you know, just observe the most intimate moments.
Right.
So we made jokes all the time.
Right. Well, I have to say, I mean, one thing that I found really interesting is that a lot of times when there's documentaries, like, these are often not actual, you know, like, trained actors, and very quickly, the entire time, even though they're not trained actors, the apparatus of the filmmaking disappear, at least from my perspective. Like, I mean, when you said they were naturals, it seems like it from my viewing, at least. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're all interrupting each other.
Yeah.
To get back to Jenn, but that was just kind of the idea, the style we wanted to do, an observational style, and we just wanted what you experience in the film, like how natural they are in front of the camera, is, I think, actually a product of our relationship with them. They felt so comfortable with us, it wasn't a big deal. And that's how we wanted it. And that's, you know, I think that's a great way to work with non-professional actors. And the reason why I interrupted you, Jenn, was maybe I'm making this up, but I feel like Lorelai would have replied to my running joke about graduating or something, like, I hope you graduated, Dane.
Oh, yeah, she did. Yeah. She did say that. Yeah. Well, I think they appreciated the ability to tell their story. They've both said several times, we're done hiding. We don't care what people think about us.
Good.
We are done. We want our stories told. If it can help people, we're more than happy to be a part of this.
Fair enough. And so what has been the reaction from other viewers? Whether, I mean, I would be interested to know what sort of reaction was in their small town, but also sort of the broader reaction to people. I mean, have you seen very different reactions? Is it a consistent reaction? Like, I'm curious as to sort of how, what the reception has been like so far to the people who've seen it.
We've had mostly positive, very, very positive reactions, and they'll say this is a very well-made film, and it made me think a lot. Those who are allies, and then those who are queer, so this is just sad. This is very, very sad, and it elicited a lot of response from me. But I hope a lot of people see this, so they understand kind of the struggles that we have to contend with.
Sure.
At these highly contentious intersections of faith and love. Romantic love, I suppose.
Sure.
We've had a couple of people say to us, why did you choose such a sad narrative? Right. And
I've had similar criticism, right? Yeah, I've had similar criticism of some of the stuff that I've put on the podcast, where it's like, well, why can't we have more either? The word that we use in Mormon culture a lot is uplifting stories, or why don't we have more stories of people who are? I've had a lot of people on my podcast who don't consider themselves Mormon anymore, or like haven't been able to figure out or don't want to figure out a place in sort of like practicing Mormondom. I mean, these folks obviously are, but like I get the same question of like, well, why aren't there more uplifting stories? So you got the same thing, I guess.
We got the same thing. Yes. So we do. We always wanted to make we wanted to make an accurate.
Yeah.
I cared a lot about accuracy.
Right.
Yeah.
Eventually, Dane gave me producer credit. Why did you give me producer credit?
Whoa, hold on. Jenn, you were always a producer, but okay, let me explain myself, okay, fine. Because this was my thesis.
Tangent.
I know.
Right. No, you're
because
fine.
it was my thesis film, I didn't know the rules of like who could actually like, because the credits in films are all kind of capricious anyways.
Sure.
They mean a lot of things, but I didn't know if I could like actually have a producer, like technically like on paper, even though you were fulfilling that role completely and phenomenally. And then I found out that I could, and I was thinking to myself, who the heck cares? Jenn's my producer. This film could not be where it is without Jenn. I was like, of course he's the producer, and you got a whole title screen to yourself. It was well earned. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. That
Because people have come up and asked me, like, what was your role? You know, this is a student film. What was your role?
no, there's no way this film could have been done without you. Like
Yeah.
it would have been totally different.
It would, and I think that I care a lot about accuracy because I come from a tradition of reflexivity and positionality. These are like Donna Haraway. This is women's studies stuff where like when we're going out to do something, to make a true story, it better damn well be true.
Right.
It's because that means we recognize Dane's position, my position, and then Marilyn, Lorelai, and how their position might change it with you know when they're around us. So that was our goal, was to make an accurate film.
Sure.
Whether it was sad or not, we as
We wanted to
documentary
elicit a
filmmakers,
specific response.
we did want to elicit specific responses, but we also wanted to tell the story as accurate as possible. They were hilarious, so we wanted to make sure that got on film.
And I think it did. I mean, at least it did for me.
They love to eat at that Chinese buffet restaurant. We wanted to make
so
sure that
kitschy.
got on film.
Sure. Yeah. And it was. Yeah.
So that's what I mean. Like, did we set out to make a sad film? No.
Right. But no, the story itself dictated that it be.
Exactly. Yeah. So it kind of drove itself. Now, we're in the process of looking at a couple more stories, Faithful 2 and 3.
Oh, wow. All right.
We would like to get that done in maybe the next 6 to 9 months. And we're setting out with the intent to have kind of a narrative that's very different.
Right.
Right?
Well, I mean, you can't tell all stories in one story. You know, I mean, just because you tell one sad story doesn't mean that they're all sad. I mean, one sad story does not mean that. Anyway, I mean.
So we want to tell accurate stories.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we can change lighting, we can change mood, we can change sound. That's what we have control over that.
And different, and and different stories will have different responses. We wanted to tell this story, wanted to be accurate, and based on some feedback and kind of the next level of change that we want to see.
Yeah.
We're searching for a specific type of story to
Fair
tell.
enough. And have you seen any differences in like sort of the reactions to the film based on sort of like sexual or gender identities?
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
Okay. I mean, are you seeing like different ones for men, women, queer, non-queer? I'd be interested to hear about the
white
difference.
Straight men have been fantastic, have been very supportive of this film, and they've not mentioned the sadness part as much. They're more intrigued by it. They say, "Oh, I never even thought about this. This didn't even occur to me."
Right.
But how wonderful! I want my father to see this.
That's good.
And they've come up to us and said that this is really important for them.
Right.
They don't, necessarily state that because they're allies or they're straight or whatever. But
Right.
in general, what we've seen, and we've had probably over 1,000 people at this point see this film, and the general feedback from straight allies, or not even allies, but straight folks, is that this is so wonderful and fascinating, and they're glad that this was made and this was done, because this is a story that they would never think.
Or maybe never even conceived of.
Well, yeah,
Right,
exactly. That this exists in their world is very interesting to them. Now, the people who identify as queer males have also been a bit, mostly very, very supportive. So, the Board of Affirmation, there's there's a good mix of people, but a lot of them are allies. They voted for this film to win the war this year. We're completely we were completely floored by the amount of support from Affirmation. It's been wonderful. The queer Mormon women, I think this might be too close to home, and it's very sad, very, very sad for them.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard in talking to you and some other folks that there's been a couple different reactions from queer Mormon women. Some who live in similar sort of arrangements to what Mary Lou and Lorelei have are sort of like, thank you so much for telling my stories. Or I don't know, I don't want to mischaracterize it, that's not the case. But then I've heard from some other queer Mormon women who have said, well, you see a lot of narratives from queer Mormon men who they leave or they do whatever and they marry and they're happy. And we see a lot of queer Mormon women's stories where like they have to make this sacrifice to accommodate the church, and they feel like this plays into that sort of, I don't want to say trope, but sort of that story where like they feel like, and again, one story can never change the entire narrative there, so you can't be like, anyway, but I've heard a number of different things, and I'm just curious as to sort of all the different sort of bifurcated stories you're hearing from queer Mormon women.
Well, yeah, this is a very interesting learning process for us too. What's sad for one group is extremely not sad for another group.
Right.
And so, so a lot of people have suggested that why don't you make a happier film, like with two women who found each other in the church and have left the church and are living great lives, and that to someone like maybe President Uchtdorf or someone may not be a happy story.
Right.
They've lost them in a way. So a leader or a highly committed church member would see that story of two women leaving the church as a very, very sad making story.
Yeah, and I think that's very much. I mean, there was a story in LDS Living about two Mormon women who had married, who had divorced, so they could both join the church. And I think that was the first time, maybe in all of recorded history, that you have Mormon people being like, "Yay, divorce!
Right.
This is a good thing."
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
really, really traditional, kind of conservative, toe the line. 80% of the Mormons probably.
Which to a lot of queer Mormons was an incredibly sad and sort of debilitating story, at least on my thing.
True. It was extremely painful, very, very painful. So I
remember seeing that.
You have that. So what's happy and what's sad is completely contingent on who's watching. So that's why I'm we have to be clear. We set out to make an accurate film. Right. Now, if we listen to the folks who say you should make a film about two women who met at the church and their journey and their story, and there's enough people who are telling us to make that film, we're going to make that film. But is it this is a new question for you, Dane. We haven't talked about this. Do we set out to make a happy film, or do we set out to make an accurate film?
My answer to that is we set out to. The theme of this film was, while Mary Lou and Lorelei are trying to, there's the intersection of faith and identity and make those two things work, one of them takes a hit. One of them is crippled, I would almost say, in that sense. That's kind of my general impression of this film that we made. So the next film, it might be something that leans more towards kind of that intersection of faith and identity. It's upholding the identity part more, but kind of morphing the faith aspect more, if that makes sense. And that's, in my opinion, that's when people are like, we want to see a happy film because they want to see the two people together, fully living their life and being as a couple, right? And that's when I hear that, that's what I think of. And it's like, that's not necessarily, happy is such a broad term, right? And it's just if it's sugary sweet, no one's going to do anything about it. It's not going to be motivating. There are going to be parts that are contentious and
no story
tension.
is 100% happy anyway. I mean, I mean, even the folks that I'm sorry to interrupt, but even the folks that I know who have like sort of met someone that they love and they've left the church and stuff like that. A lot of those folks, at least to me, like in their private moments when I talk to them, they're like, there are parts about sort of the church of my youth that I miss, that I know I can't have, and I'm still, even though I very much left the church, when the church does something that is concerning to me or or it feels anti-queer, it still hurts me, even though I feel like I've made efforts to put it down. I can't really ever put it down because it's so much a part of me. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not, forecasting what your next film is, but I would be surprised if there's anybody who's like, no, church does its stuff. It doesn't affect me at all. I'm completely happy and I'm completely left. Even leaving the church, I think a lot of people can't fully leave because it's part of them.
Right. And I feel like that's, we've made this film what kind of focusing more on accommodating the faith part of it, and now I think we're tending towards something that is accommodating more the identity
Right.
with the faith. And piggybacking off what you said, Jenn, about the response to this, I've always been really happy with what I call the Orthodox Mormons when they watch this, the highly committed, what you said, the highly committed Mormons, how a lot of them say, like, I never had thought about this. I never realized the emotional depth that these people have to go through. And for a goal of mine with the film has always been to foster conversation and compassion. I wanted people to start talking about this because there's just not enough conversation, even though there's tons more awareness nowadays than there ever has been.
Well, and when you mention that, I think it also gets back to the fact that for a lot of believing Mormons, queerness is about sex. It's only a sexual, like, intercourse kind of identity. And oftentimes when you will mention, I mean, it's happened to me when I said that, like, I'm bi, I mean, it's sort of like to them it's just, the only thing that means is gay sex. And they don't think, and I think one thing that your film does brilliantly is requiring the viewer to recognize this is a full-fledged relationship. It's not just about sex. In fact, in this case, doesn't seem to be any, and yet there's still this incredible romantic and emotional depth to this relationship that I think is good for a lot of Orthodox Mormons who, even if they haven't really thought about it, the way that we frame it, at least in the church or in a lot of different ways, is about gayness or queerness as just sex.
Right.
Which is very male-centric.
Yes.
Exactly.
So so there's a lot that's been written about this, about the queer community and how it's pretty much through the gaze of the white gay male, right? So how we view, how we talk about it is through kind of the way they experience their orientation, which is all about sex. A lot of times it's about the sex. For women, it's different. I mean, we have to thank the asexuals for coming up with this division of romantic orientation versus sexual orientation, right? So for asexuals, a lot of them can be aromantic and asexual. And then suddenly, our community is like, oh my gosh, okay, wow, there is a division. You're right.
Right.
So I could be homoromantic and heterosexual, or
Right.
homoromantic and bisexual.
Right.
And these are things that I think that have arisen out of recognizing differences within the queer community itself.
Yeah.
And remembering that, but we have to remember where the power lies, and it's still predominantly with the white gay male.
Yeah, and Jenn and I, we designed this film to be received by the 80% of the church, calling the 80% the highly committed, the Orthodox, the governing bloc, and if we had made a film that, let's say, was more critical of, like, being faithful in the church and so on, they wouldn't touch this. They'd be like, this is anti-Mormon.
Yep.
We don't want to hear about this queer story. But instead, we chose to design the film in a way so that they would watch it. You know what? This doesn't attack my testimony, doesn't attack my faith. Well, in some way, but it still gets me thinking. It still gets me thinking, whoa, we have this marginalized group, this huge group that I just love those comments that we get when they're like, I just never thought about that.
Well, and
I'm like, that's exactly who the film is for.
That's
If it was
perfect.
super critical as well, the other thing is it may not have been Mary Lou and Lorelai's story because they're in. So if it was going to be super critical of the church, like, it may not have really been their story.
They told from the get-go, they was like, that was one of their stipulations.
We will not be a part of this film if it shines a negative light on the church.
Sure.
They didn't want us to.
We will pull out at any point that we feel like this is.
Well, good for them, sort of being like this. I mean, having their terms and stick. I don't know.
Right.
For me, I don't know.
It was good. I mean, we, in terms of, like, the film contract, so to speak, quote unquote, it was just well played from the get go. It was just like, here's our expectations, here's your expectations. Now we know. Let's move. Let's get the ball rolling.
Right.
I told them I wanted to graduate. They said, don't be critical of the church. And I was like, okay, fine.
Right. And you both, it seems
I
like you both got it.
graduated and
right,
yeah.
everybody got what they wanted.
Well, I feel like the stars really aligned
Uh-huh.
with this story. You know, just like Dane said, we had already committed to them. You know, when we sat down with them and they said, "This is our criteria," and we said, you know, we were committed to their story.
Right.
So whatever they wanted, we were going to give it to them. It was going to be their story.
Fair enough.
Right.
Well, and if I could close with just giving you both just an opportunity to say something in closing, my question would only be, it's a 17-minute film. There's a lot of interactions that you've had with other queer Mormons or with Mary Lou and Lorelei. Obviously, you can't get everything into a 17-minute film. What's sort of what else besides? I mean, obviously, the movie is complete in its message, but what else besides what's in there would you want to say that didn't make it in there, or would you want to sort of again emphasize what else? What would you like to say in closing?
Well, the moment that I knew that I was meant to do this with Dane was when we sat down with Mary Lou's dad.
Oh, who's in the film? Yes.
Who's in the film?
Right.
And well, he
Very briefly.
represented.
Right.
It was a brief scene with him, and he represented in this final version, kind of the authority, the voice of authority.
Right.
And but when we first sat down with him, and we weren't really filming, we just wanted kind of to talk to him. He shared with us a very powerful testimony that he had when Mary Lou came out to him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a bishop at the time, and he prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed about it, and he had this overwhelming feeling that she was exactly who she needed to be.
Mm.
He felt so much love from God for his daughter in this moment, and he carried that with him. You know, when we talked to him, he always had that kind of love for her anytime we interacted with him in this process of filmmaking.
Mm.
It really confirmed in my mind, having grown up in the Mormon faith, I've known no other faith.
Right.
It was a familiar feeling, that warmth of confirmation, that the stars were aligned, and that this was meant to be. We were meant to meet him. We were meant to meet his daughter. We were meant to meet his daughter's one true love. I really wish we were filming that scene. It was powerful, and the spirit was there.
Sure.
We actually did technically film. I recorded that when he said that, but it just wasn't a good angle.
The lighting was off.
It was in one of our like preliminary, like, let's go out and
He had
meet
some
them.
backlight behind him, right?
Right. Yeah, and it was just that was the first time we had met him, and we just, you know, out of practice, I always just leave the camera on when we have it talks
Well,
like
we
that.
have it then. There you go.
Mm.
But it didn't make it into the film, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that was a really powerful moment. That was all of that.
Well, if the audio is good and you want a place to put the audio, I mean, not put any pressure. Obviously, leave it as you want, but
We'll check with him and we'll get back to you.
fair enough.
We really wanted to make sure that the audience. I think the Mormon population, general Mormon population, I believe still considers homosexuality or sexual orientation or romantic orientation a choice, and it is not.
No.
You know, we talk a lot. I feel like the narrative is we have the gift of agency, so we can choose not to act on these. You can choose not to act on these things, but it's. We set out to really emphasize the fact that this is not a choice. Being Mormon is the choice.
Right.
Having your orientation is not the choice. You know, and listeners out there might just shake their head and say, no, but that's not what the leaders are saying.
Well, listen to the people who are actually experiencing this.
Correct.
I think that, and this is the power for me of the film, is that we're getting it straight from them with very little sort of editorializing from sort of the straight perspective here. I think if we, I don't know, my personal thing is that if you want to know how people experience it, well, then ask the people who are experiencing it. You know, talk,
yeah.
and even more so than talk, like start the conversation and then just listen. And then if you can't, don't push back immediately. I mean, if you can ask questions and that sort of thing, but sit with those. If it disagrees with the sort of feelings that you have or the convictions that you have, sit with those contradictions. And one thing that'll be really useful, I mean, for those who are straight or straight allies or things like that, like we have to, queer Mormons have to sit with that tension, like that is our existence. So you can do it for 20 minutes. Like you can,
Right.
that's the kind of thing that pushes this whole issue forward, is being willing to sort of let yourself be challenged in that way.
And the more that we understand about this, I mean, there's still that's not really understood. I just don't think you can brush it off as something worldly. That we're, that,
Speaking of the recent
yes,
Elder Oaks talk, right?
He mentioned that several times, and I listened to it yesterday, and I was thinking,
Haven't yet.
oh gosh, maybe a lot of people are thinking that we're kind of following this trend, Dane and I, to make this film. I can think of a few people who really probably think that, which is fine, but it's wrong. it's inaccurate.
Right.
We're not following a trend. In fact, we're kind of going against the trend. People who aren't LDS say lesbian Mormons. Is that even a thing? I mean, this
Right.
isn't.
Particularly observant lesbian Mormons sounds
Correct,
like
yeah.
an oxymoron to a lot of people who are queer but not of the LDS tradition.
Believe it or not, we're not. This is not following the trend of the world.
Right.
What we're doing, we're showing people who are actually still in the Mormon faith. We're actually, we expected, negative feedback from all sides.
Right.
We're not out here to please anyone. We're out
No.
here to share a true story. That's it. And queer Mormons are not out there to be worldly for you.
Right.
And you don't need to go out and say, hey, did you listen to that Oaks talk? Elder Oaks said
Yeah.
that what you're doing is wrong. You should make better choices, which is probably happening right now.
Yes.
All over the world. Parents are going to their children. Didn't you just hear that talk?
Yeah.
Let's all read Proclamation on the Family this
Let's
this
all read
Monday
the
night.
ensign when it comes out.
Yeah, and that I just want to throw out there there's a better response than that if you're a parent.
There's a more Christ-like response than that, in my view.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Think about his position, right? He's overlooking this religion. He's looking out for the survival of this religion. And he actually, I can't get inside his head. I have no idea. But I do know that if you're a leader of this international religion, you definitely... We've gotten this far, right? Mormonism has gotten this far because we made the right choices.
Well, if this works, well, then let's not change course, perhaps. I don't know.
Right, something like that.
I would love it if a general authority saw our film. I think they need to see it. They need to have that perspective and see
Right.
what these grand accommodations people are making to remain faithful, to not be worldly.
Right. To be perfectly honest, I hope that if they know of these stories and yet they still do what they do, that actually is less hopeful to me than if they haven't. Like, I hope that they haven't. I hope that they're not
Right.
aware. If they're aware, anyway, that's
Yeah.
me editorializing again, but...
I don't know. I'm optimistic for the future, of course, because I feel like the truth usually comes out in the end.
The truth will out. Let's hope.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I definitely, I understand. I do love the leaders, and I understand
Yeah,
what they're up against.
me
I mean,
too.
they're up against their own experiences, what they know of the world. I don't know if any of you out there have read Cheiko Kozaki's interview with Greg Prince in 2005, Dialogue, Journal of Mormon Thought. But she was very surprised when the elders and the prophet didn't ask her to go over the proclamation.
And she was on the Relief Society General Board. Like, they didn't ask the Relief Society General Board to go over it, which she kind of thought maybe they would. Just to give some context there, sorry.
Correct. Yeah, so you read that.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Yeah, they weren't even informed of it, right? So, basically, President Hinckley had asked her if they could present the proclamation on the family in General Relief Society meeting. And the apostle who was their liaison, right, had said, "Isn't it wonderful that he made the choice to present it at the Relief Society meeting?" And then Chaco says, "Well, that was fine, but as I read it, I thought that we could have made a few changes in it. Sometimes I think they get so busy that they forget that we are there." This is from the General Relief Society
Right.
president, Chaco Okazaki.
Right.
This is not a knock against the leaders at all. This is just kind of the way that we produce knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
There is no knowledge that exists outside of the space in which it was created. This is what I learned as a geographer.
Mm-hmm.
This is the space of Mormon knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we're working. We're working within these confines. The confine of the Proclamation of Family. You have to understand that within that space, there was no female input
Right.
on a thing that's about a family.
Right.
A family which includes male and female members. There was only male, and male that comes is actually very geographically deterministic to the Mormon culture region. So all these males come out of the Mormon culture region. They don't have any perspectives outside of it. Yes, maybe they served some time in Africa, or they had served missions abroad, but that doesn't mean that their worldview changes because they've done that. They still come out of this kind of body of knowledge. The space in which their knowledge was created is still very Mormon Mecca.
Right. Yeah,
So-
it's not really conducive to sort of, to use a Mormon way of talking about it, to enlarging the stakes of Zion. I mean, it's within that space, and it's not from without it. And if we want to enlarge the stakes, we're going to have to include things that are outside of our experience. And we're going to have to allow for things that sort of challenge us, or else we're going to be a small tent church, not just in our doctrine and in our culture, but also in our size, in our importance, in our relationship with the world. If we're so concerned with our borders being secure, how do we enlarge them?
Right. Well, we have to make that choice
Right.
consciously.
Yeah, I think so.
We're all limited to our spatialized knowledges.
Sure. And Dane, I don't know if you have any closing shots, parting, yeah.
Totally. I think this would be a good opportunity. I mean, I'd like to be known. I'd like people to know that I'm a fierce queer Mormon ally. That this project has been amazingly fulfilling, and more than I had ever imagined it would become already. And I hope the people that are listening, they feel like they have a friend in me, that I can be. I want them to know that I'll fight their fight. I'll tell their stories, and I truly believe that, and that's how, that's kind of what brought me into filmmaking. Is just stories have have an amazing quality to change the world and how we think, and yeah, I just would like to express that that I'm an LGBT ally, and I'm here to tell queer Mormon stories.
Fair enough. Well, again, thanks so much for the time, for being willing to have me over to record this, and thanks so much for sharing your movie, not just with me, but with everyone. And I hope everyone needs to, I don't know, I'll put in a plug, not because I've been asked to, but because I thought it was so meaningful and so moving. Look for opportunities to see this film. Everyone, I think, regardless of your background or your identity, can get a lot from this. Anyway.
If you want to see it, get in contact with us.
Yep, sounds good. All right, thanks a lot. This has been another episode of I Like to Look for Rainbows. Please join us again next time.
All the things that I love might be over, and I'm stuck here, both hands full of closure. But I'm not sorry for me. I know that it's nice.